You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 245 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. Today, we're heading to the Isle of Wight to meet Francesca Cooper, who farms with her business partner, Holly Fallick, on 500 acres of the historic Nunwell estate. A rural surveyor by training, Francesca changed course to follow a long-held dream to farm and now keeps a range of livestock with Holly, including 100 Belted Galloway cattle, 300 free-range hens, and some native breed pigs. And they currently sell direct to consumers through an online farm shop and meat box service. Francesca, welcome to Meet the Farmers. It's great to be on the Isle of Wight. I think you're the first farmer to be on the podcast from the Isle of Wight.
Yeah, I was going to say from the sunny Isle of Wight. We're normally sunny, but it's not actually sunny today. It's raining again.
I was going to say it's likewise in Norfolk as well.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the island and farming on the island.
So the Isle of Wight, I suppose it's quite big. We have a population of about 120,000 people, so it's like a little bit of the mainland that's broken away rather than being a sort of remote island. We have, all the infrastructure that we have on the mainland, apart from the fact that we have the Solent dividing us from the mainland, which does mean that logistically farming does involve that extra headache of trying to get either crops or livestock on and off the island.
Yeah, of course.
And so there are various ways that we deal with that, whether it be using hauliers to get our livestock across, or there's a grain group which collates all of the grain on the island and exports it into the commodity market. So we do have that extra hurdle. But as far as the sort of population and size of the island, it does feel a little bit like if you were sort of part of, say, Dorset or any of those parts of the South Coast.
And I think I'm right in saying that you're not from a farming background yourself.
No, so I was brought up on a small holding where we had sort of a house cow and some goats and vegetable gardens and things like that, but not from a farming background, no. And so I suppose my main experience of sort of larger scale farming was through surveying, managing and working with farmers in that capacity. But yes, and then it was a bit of a baptism of fire taking on the 120 acres that we did here at Nunwell.
As we're moving towards Cirencester and training to be a rural surveyor, where did that interest come from, and how determined were you that you wanted that kind of life?
I suppose I didn't know exactly. I mean, no one knows, do they, when they leave school, what you wanted to do?
No,
and,
exactly.
Actually, at the time of leaving, finishing A-levels and going to university, I actually went to Gloucestershire University for a couple of weeks to study criminology, because in my head I wanted to be a mounted police officer.
Okay.
At that time, you just have no idea, do you? And you have to decide sort of halfway through A-levels what you want to do as well. So, my idea was I wanted to be a mounted police officer. I'd always had horses and sort of liked the idea of being a police officer and doing that sort of public work. So I went to Gloucestershire University, decided I hated it, and then my dad, who worked in the horticultural industry, had been to the Royal Agricultural University quite a lot for various things, and was like, well, why don't you have a look at the courses there? And I started looking into it, and I suppose the rural land management course that I did just appealed to, I suppose, working on the land again. And I've always had a passion for it. I think I didn't realise how much I had a passion from it until I was removed from the small holding and removed from, my life being outdoors all the time, suddenly realising that actually I did want to do that. I did want to do something that was connected with the land, but also in sort of, at that point, I didn't think I necessarily wanted to be a farmer, but I knew I wanted to do something land-based, but also to sort of use, I'd always been vaguely academic, and so using those academic skills to help with management and look into all of that side of it. And my dad's a soil scientist, so we've always had a sort of dinner table conversations about, growing things and
nematodes and
that world. Yeah. And so, suppose it's that thing of like, we go to school, you're sort of removed from it, you're busy doing your thing. And then that was actually when I went to university, trying to follow a slightly different trajectory, that I realized that actually, no, I did want to do something land-based, and that was really important for me to be involved in that world. And I've always been really passionate as well about growing things. I mean, I've always had a vegetable garden ever since I was about 5.
Okay.
I've always had my own vegetable garden. It's being outdoors, using my hand and practical skills, balanced with also being able to use my head and manage spreadsheets and all of that sort of thing. It's sort of, when I looked into the rural land management degree, it sort of ticked all those boxes to me.
And I mean, actually, let's dive a little bit into that, because alongside your work at Numwell as a farmer, you are still a working rural surveyor as well, working as a freelance surveyor. Tell me a little bit more about what that means day to day for anyone who might not know.
So I suppose surveying, being a land agent, I suppose most people's experience of a land agent would be watching Clarkson's Farm and Cheerful Charlie. He's a land agent.
Yeah, of course.
So it's having that backroom element of farming, which is the tenancy agreements, the countryside stewardship agreements, the BPS applications, as was the sort of planning, looking at rural buildings, lots of residential work, sort of working with tenancies and things like that. And so actually at the moment, predominantly, I do a lot of my sort of extra work with the landowner that we, so that the farm that we manage is on a wider estate, and I help him with his tenancy agreements and things. But yeah, it's essentially all of the paperwork side. So it's people that own diverse landed portfolios, we would then manage all of that for them. And I found it obviously incredibly useful. Like I did all of the application for the countryside stewardship for our farm, and it was obviously something that we could offer as part of the package as well when we were taking on the land. And I think it was quite appealing to the landowner that we had those skills. Yeah.
Of course, countryside stewardship, our date of recording today is the 16th. So deadline for claims was yesterday. Did you get everything in?
I did, yeah, even though it was on the go slow. So it went in at literally like an hour before. So I thought I'd left loads of time. But no.
Yeah, you and probably the rest of the country, I'm guessing. But
yeah, that's probably why.
So moving towards Numwell, I mean, how did the sort of idea come between you and your business partner Holly to start farming?
It was, I suppose, quite a long term. It was me and Holly, and also my husband, who's also a rural surveyor. So between the three of us, we'd always had, myself and my husband always been, I suppose, because we both worked as land agents, we've both been on farms, lots of different farms, and looking at it. And I suppose you get that sort of idea, especially when we're both quite practical, that it would be nice to try and do it ourselves one day, especially where we have all of that business knowledge. Obviously, the actual hands-on stuff is things that we're learning very quickly as we are doing the farming. But I suppose we were, frustrated farmers. And then when we both moved back to the island and then linked up with Holly again, she has also always had sort of an idea that she would like to do something land-based. I don't think any of us really knew what that was at the time. And actually, when we moved back to the Isle of Wight, we were both, Holly's family and me and Oliver, my husband, were vegan, vegetarian. Probably we had vegans, so we were terrible vegans, but but very much looking at, I suppose, following the prevailing wisdom that moving towards a more plant-based diet would help reduce our impact on the planet and all of those things, and all of the data that was coming out, and there's cowspiracy and all of that, and we were reading it, and lots of it did sort of make sense, especially against the background of industrialized farming and some of the more extractive elements of farming that we had seen in our job and we didn't feel very comfortable with supporting. So when we moved down to the island, we were sort of mid-vegan experiment. We actually went down the route of setting up a market garden. So we set up a no-dig market garden on our my family's small holding, which is about an acre of market garden. And we sold vegetables to the local community. So Holly at that point was involved in doing that, running the market garden. We then, both Holly and I, had really big problems with our health being vegan.
Okay.
It just didn't suit us at all. So we got anemia, chronic fatigue, all of those things. So we had to reintroduce meat into our diets. And during that process of working out how we could still balance all the things that we believe with planetary health and managing land and managing soil, but reintegrating the idea of livestock back into that vision, we obviously came across lots of stuff about regenerative agriculture, Alan Savory, people like Richard Perkins, looking into lots of different YouTube things, reading loads of books. And I suppose at that point we started looking at modelling a different way of farming that we were really passionate about supporting, and that we didn't see many people doing it in our local community or able to sort of access the types of meat that we were happy to eat. I mean, we did do quite a lot of mail ordering of meat from places like Piper's Farm, trying to support the people on the Isle of Wight that we felt were managing the land in the way that we were looking to support. But also just because, why not? We started writing a business plan for a farm. And I think, having been a land agent, we knew how hard it was to get access to land. And we knew that if anything did come up, that we'd have to jump on it really quickly. And so, starting to model a farm with all the backdrop of, the finances, and working out how that would work financially and whether it could support us. And we started modeling it, and actually it looked like it could work. And then fortuitously and rather bizarrely, this farm came up, which was, you can see it from the small holding. So it was literally, and we'd spent a lot of our childhood running around on this estate, and suddenly it was coming up, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the Numwell estate as a whole, and how your holding fits within it.
So the Numwell estate is about 900 acres of land. A third of the estate is in a rewilding project that's managed by the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. They have that under a nutrient neutrality scheme, and we graze our cattle and pigs on it. But we are now managing another third of the estate at the moment, under some of it's permanent pasture, and some of it's currently arable, which we're reverting to pasture. And then there's some land that's currently and going to continue to be in arable production. So we've sort of got all of those different land uses happening on the estate, which is quite interesting to see as sort of a comparison, side-by-side comparison of those different land uses. We manage our bit under a share farming agreement. So essentially we're in a joint venture with the landlord. So right from the beginning, we didn't have to pay a rent, but we did have to model our farm across 5 years to show that he would be getting the return that he otherwise would have got through a rent. And so it's quite a front-loaded process, but it's worked really well for us as new entrants because we haven't had that upfront cost of, an FBT rent at the beginning. Yeah.
And you said you put a business plan together. How fixed was that in your mind, and how has that been playing out since you started?
Yeah, when we first started, we took on 120 acres, and that is obviously, in relative terms, a very small farm. So we had to work out how we could make enough money off that to sort of build the business, and also knowing that we wanted to have cattle, and cattle are very expensive. So, and obviously there's quite a long lead in time with cattle, especially with a suckler herd, to get to the point when we're selling our own stock. So we use different enterprises. So we've got a pastured laying hen enterprise, which obviously started producing and bringing in income right from the beginning, and also pigs. So they also started bringing in income right from the beginning. And then we did have some store cattle, and we still do buy in some store cattle to try and bridge that gap as well. And as our suckler herd is still growing, so we had to sort of build in these different layers of our business, which meant that it was quite a complicated business at the beginning. I suppose it also was part of what we had learned and gleaned from our reading was having a more diverse farm. It's obviously more resilient financially in some ways, but also from the land perspective and the different things that they offer and the different tools that you can use those chickens and pigs and cattle for is also, I suppose, part of our ethos as a farm is to try and maintain diversity and increase diversity on the land, and having diversity of livestock is part of that too. And yeah, as far as the financial side, we actually are broadly trying to follow the first part of the 5-year plan, but then obviously in year 2, our landowner then decided to offer us a lot more land. And so we're now going through a bit more of a rapid growth strategy than we had initially thought. But part of that will be sort of funded by the countryside stewardship scheme that we've gone into, which will help us with that rapid growth.
Okay. For anyone out there who's perhaps already in some sort of share farming arrangement scheme, or similarly, if anyone's thinking about share farming, from your experience, what are the things to sort of look out for, I suppose, and that could be with your land agent hat on as well as your current hat on farming.
A lot of what we did at the beginning was essentially to pitch to the landowner, and it's only since we've now been learning much more about we've been fortunate to be on some an accelerator program recently, which has given us an insight into the world of business. And we listen to the Diary of a CEO podcast and things, but essentially what we did was pitching to our landowner like we were pitching to an investor, and that was very much then developing that relationship of what is his problems that he wanted to solve on his estate and what were we offering to join that together. I think that when you're looking to do a share farming agreement, you need to be really open and honest about what both of your objectives are and that they do link together, because essentially you are going to always be working together, and like financially that's going to be very linked. I think it is about making sure at the beginning that you are aligned in what your goals are for how you manage that land. We're really lucky because our landowner is really open to everything we're doing, and that, I suppose, fortuitously, the plan that we'd already developed fitted very much with what he was looking for on the estate. But I think if you didn't have that, I think that first part is really important to work out, that to make sure you're aligned in your objectives to the land, because quite often share farming agreements are quite short term. So we actually only have a 5-year agreement, which lots of people would say is terrifying, but we are very much linked because he owns 25% of the cattle. It's a little bit different to a tenancy where at the end of it you could just stop paying the rent and then leave. We feel like we are building something together, and whilst on paper it may be 5 years, in lots of ways we're much more intrinsically linked together. And I think sometimes it is just about maintaining the relationships, and I think that these new options to share farming and things like that do offer that ability to actually have much more of a holistic relationship with what you're both trying to achieve on the land. I think it is about dialogue and setting out your objectives at the beginning.
Meet the Farmers is brought to you by RuralPod Media, the only podcast production agency to specialise in the rural sector. We're on a mission to make rural stories mainstream and help businesses, organisations and communities like you tell your story through podcasting. Podcasting is a fantastic way of connecting with your audience, whoever that might be, getting your message out there and networking with leaders in your niche. RuralPod Media can help you by launching your new podcast or helping you with the technical side. We also provide podcast training and an audit service if you already have a podcast, you're not sure where to take it to next. For more information or to book a call, visit ruralpodmedia.co.uk. That's ruralpodmedia.co.uk. We're going to move on to the part of the show where we talk about wider industry challenges and opportunities. So for you, and you're wearing several hats as a new entrant. You also have the share farming agreement. You're working in horticulture and direct selling. There's lots of sort of things going on. What are the challenges that the industry faces from your point of view?
I mean, I think it can't be overstated how sort of huge the ending of BPS is going to be. I mean, it was obviously we started knowing that was going, but there's a lot of our farmers around us who are still waiting for a replacement to BPS, and we keep having to say it's not going to happen. This is what we've got, and I think that in some ways it offers a massive opportunity to those of us that want to farm in a way that fits into those schemes. We are essentially wanting to farm in a way that is very in line with sort of developing all of those public goods that the countryside stewardship scheme wants to pay for. And so therefore it's an opportunity for us. But as far as a threat to the industry as a whole, I think it is going to be quite scary for people transitioning. And I think a lot of people are waiting for the last minute to do it. And that is going to be even more of a challenge. But then I understand as well why they've done that, because we are still waiting for most of the options under the SFI to come out. And so we have been constantly drawn along waiting for the next thing to come out. But I think that we actually have known that this is the way it's going, and we designed our farm knowing this is the way it was going, and actually we have been sort of vindicated in the way that we have designed it. I think there are a lot of opportunities for sort of looking at, I suppose this morning we were sat down with Niels Corfield looking at gathering data on how it's working, how we can farm productively, and also in a way that is providing all the public goods that we can get the money from the government to fund, and also to use grants to help us gather this data. And I think that it's a big transition period, but if you know how to get hold of those funding pots, it is possible. But I think there is a huge barrier to entry with that I mean, I'm a land agent, and some of it is incredibly complicated to me, let alone someone who spends most of their time under a cow and doesn't like looking at spreadsheets. I think it is quite tricky, but I think that we've got an amazing rural hub here on the island. They offer free advice. The money is coming through, but it is just, it does feel like layer upon layer of bureaucracy. I personally think that it is going in sort of the right way. You know, we do have a biodiversity crisis. We do have a climate crisis. We do have to move this way. And I think it is possible. And I think a lot of regenerative farmers are showing that it's possible to have very productive farms, still producing food, still producing all of the raw materials that we need to, but also to farm in a way that we can get the money for the public goods. But I can see that there'll be a lot of challenges for farmers that haven't got that far with it yet, and that maybe some of them will decide that they won't be moving into this new phase of farming, and maybe that will mean that more young new entrant farmers will be moving into those areas of land, and maybe that's not the end of the world. I don't know. We shall see.
Yeah, I mean, it's called a transition period for a reason, isn't it? And we're still going through it, and we will see what the situation is by the time that BPS is finally gone at the end of 2027. Nice shout out there for Niels Caulfield there as well. Make sure you scroll back, listeners, to episode not that long ago. I think it was just before Christmas, the episode with Niels. What about the future then for you? You're still in a stage where there's lots happening. You're establishing yourself. What would you like the future for you to look like as a business?
I suppose growing into our boots, like with what we've taken on with this expansion and the countryside stewardship, the wood pasture restoration that we're doing. A lot of it is just sort of getting to the point that we're really doing what we're doing well, and we've done a lot, and we've learned a lot over the 2.5 years that we've been farming, and we've got better and better. But I suppose just trying to hone all of our systems and make sure that we do that before we get distracted. We are being offered lots of different opportunities to work with different people, do different things, but I think that we'd quite like to rein it back a little bit and try and make sure that we are doing all of the things that we're doing really well. And we've been doing I've been on the AHGB Roots to Resilience course, and so I've been looking much more at all of our figures again, doing lots more economic accounting, making sure it all makes sense against the labour input that we're putting into each part of the business, and then making sure that we put our energy into the bits that are the most effective for growing our business. I suppose looking at ourselves as entrepreneurs rather than just farmers, and thinking about wanting to run a really effective business as well as a really effective farm and production. So looking at profit and not just production, which I think is something else that I know the AHDB are pushing that quite hard at the moment, saying, look, now we don't have BPS, we need to look at our businesses as businesses rather than just as food, looking at farming as just sort of the most that you can produce, and looking at your turnover, actually looking at what your profit is. And I suppose we're doing that very much with our business, and then also using that to look at which bits we expand. And I suppose we do have, not only do we have the 3 enterprises, we also have the direct sales business, which I suppose is a completely separate, in some ways, enterprise. And looking at all those parts and which bits we develop, especially against the fact that there's 2 of us working in the business and we have different skill sets, and which bits we expand, and whether we add any other enterprises. We might add some pastured meat chickens, but that would mean setting up a micro slaughtery. And I suppose we're creative and we like doing lots of new things, but I suppose we're trying to be sensible, reining ourselves in and trying to think a bit more business minded about what we're doing, and putting our energy into the right bits. So that's sort of our main focus at the moment.
Yeah, so I think that's part of the beauty of your model as well, isn't it? You could go in so many different directions, but at the same time, you can just focus on what works and learn what works for you. But similarly, if you need to pivot, then you can as well.
Yeah, and I think that with, when we were speaking to Niels, we're looking currently at the soil side of the farm, and actually that is something that can be monetized. We can use what we're doing with building soils and running trial plots, not just because of being under countryside stewardship and getting paid for various bits of that, but also whether we work with local water companies and get them to pay for various parts of it. And I suppose that's the other thing with farming, is this farming transition is that there are now lots of private pots of money that we have to look at trying to get hold of, and sort of model how you get hold of those, and then hopefully disseminate that knowledge throughout the farming community.
Let's move on to the quick questions, which have absolutely nothing to do with farming, unless you can work farming into them somehow. The first is, if you could meet anyone in history, who would it be?
So the estate here has been owned by the Oglander family for almost 1,000 years. And I would want to meet Rob Oglander, who owns it now. I'd love to meet the first person that bought this estate and looked at this land and saw the potential of this area of the Isle of Wight as where he wanted to settle. And I'd love to meet him and to see what he sees. Maybe I wouldn't be able to see it, I'm only meeting him, but I'd be able to speak to him about what he was, about what the estate looked like 1,000 years ago. This bit of land, I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And the second one is there anything on your bucket list that you haven't yet done? What would that be?
I suppose getting the opportunity to farm and be here. I mean, we were stood with 90 CEOs of the Wildlife Trust yesterday who came on a tour, and I'm realising that, I mean, it's mind-blowing that we've got to this point so quickly. And in some ways, this was a lifelong dream to get the farm. And it's a bit glib to say that there isn't anything on my bucket list, but I mean, if I died tomorrow, I feel like I would have achieved quite a lot of, if you'd have taken me back 5 years and said, what would you have wanted to achieve in your whole lifetime? I think having my own farm and running my own business on this amazing area of land would be pretty close to the top. And I've done that. That's great. Which is, right now I feel that. There's so many other things I want to do. But as far as, there aren't many things I would want to do apart from what I'm doing right now.
The final questions, Francesca, if you have a message for the public, any message, what would it be?
I think support your local farmers as much as you can. I think buying from your local farms is incredibly important. We couldn't do what we're doing if it wasn't for the fact that we have so many local people buying our meat and eggs. And I think it's such an easy way to vote with your money. We get to do it 3 times a day, and just doing a little bit of research into how your local farmers farm, whether it's something you want to support, whether it isn't, go and talk to them, and buy local as much as possible, and buy seasonal, and buy primary products that aren't ultra processed. And I think you can go a long way to improve your health and also just to improve the lives of your local farmers.
And your message to farmers?
It's a scary time, but I think that it is possible. And I suppose I really trust this regenerative farming process. I do trust that not only can we use it to produce amazing food, we can also use it to help us and our bottom lines to use the subsidies to integrate those into our farming systems in a way that means that we are profitable going forward.
Excellent. Well, Francesca, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's really exciting what you're doing there in the Isle of Wight. And I should say, please also give your Instagram page a plug, because your content is fantastic.
Thank you. Numwell Home Farm. And we post pretty much every day, and we post on our stories. So do, give us a follow.
Yeah, listeners, really worth giving them a follow. That is it for today. Huge thanks to my guest, Francesca Cooper, for coming on the show. Thank you also for listening. Please share this episode on your socials. Tell other farmers you know about the podcast. We're trying to get more and more farmers listening to the show, seeing some good growth at the moment, but there's always more we can do. So if you can share it with another farmer, that would be great. Don't forget to check out our sister show as well, Rural Business Focus. You can find that wherever you're listening to this show. Next time, we'll be talking about Japan, and I'll be joined by Rupert Shinner from Devon. We'll also be talking a little bit about New Zealand as well, but mostly Japan. But for now, I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers, and thank you very much for listening.